I want to talk to you guys about the economy, but not the economy today, the economy in July 2022. Because what happened in July 2022 is we had 2 consecutive quarters of declining GDP, which is the definition of a recession. Except that it's actually not. And that is where things got confusing for me and for a lot of Americans. I'm not really an expert on the economy and economic issues. That's really Dustin's wheelhouse. And the reason I'm making this video is because I remember Dustin telling me at the time that this happened that the Biden administration is changing the definition of a recession. And I just believed him. But when I looked into things further, I really struggled to understand what was going on. The White House press secretary was saying this is not the definition of a recession and we are not in a recession. The Treasury Secretary, Janet Yellen, she was saying the same thing. She said this is not an economy in recession. This is an economy of slowed growth. And even the White House website had posted something saying this is not how a recession is defined, either in the dictionary or by economic analysts, and we're not in a recession. And when I read all that, I got really confused because I was like, okay, well, if that's not the definition of the recession, then why is anybody saying that it is? And so then I took to Google and I really exhausted myself just looking at a bunch of different articles, a bunch of different resources, trying to figure out why people were saying it was the definition of a recession. And what I found was that the idea of, and I'm reading this off of a screen because like I said, I'm not real familiar with the economy. The idea that 2 consecutive quarters of declining GDP equals a recession is a common metric that is used by analysts and commentators just worldwide. And not only is it used by commentators, but it is actually in many macroeconomics textbooks. And so what the Biden administration was trying to do was say, hey, there are other indicators that this economy is healthy, and therefore we are rejecting this common definition. The larger point, I think, is that this was sowing a lot of confusion. That rather than acknowledging this is the commonly used definition, but we have reason to believe it's not accurate here, there was just this denial of like, no, that's not the definition. And that really it's making everybody confused to the point where I found statistics saying that now the majority of Americans think we're in a recession, even though we're not. And to be fair, like I'm sure that the Biden administration confusing the definition of recession is not the only reason. You know, if you're going to the grocery store and you see like the cost of groceries rise and you see that your money is not going as far in the economy, that's another reason why many people would think we're in a recession. But I think we could agree that when you have the presidential administration muddying this concept of what the economy is doing and what it is and how it's performing and what it means to be in decline, to be in a recession, you start to just mistrust anything you hear. And I do want to mention too that July 2022 is right before the midterm elections. I don't feel like this was the sort of thing of just I think there was a motive behind this. On top of that, just the idea that saying we're in recession can be a self-fulfilling prophecy, and I think they did want to keep the economy from spiraling downward. In fairness, typically a recession is not declared until after it's already happened. So I see both sides to this, like I see why they would do this, but I definitely also see why this makes it very confusing to the American public, and it makes the public disinclined to trust what the government is saying in the future. And so what I think is important here is emphasizing that something that I'm starting to see more just in general is redefining of common terms. I mean, I don't want to get into it too much, but racism, for example, like I see that the way the term racism is used today is definitely very different from how it was used 20, 30 years ago. And it is a very loaded term where when you try to have conversations about this thing that is very relevant today, you have trouble having conversations and understanding each other because you're taking an already commonly used term and making it mean something else. And so what I'm advocating for is, when you see a term being commonly used in a certain way, I think it's a better idea to acknowledge the use of that term and then talk about how there are other factors to consider as opposed to just gaslighting the American public, which I think is kind of what happens, and don't like that.